In 4 months, the United States will be at the beginning of our primary season, the process in which the two parties select their nominee for President of the United States for the 2024 general election. For 50 years, the Iowa caucus has been the first presidential contest held, and then New Hampshire has been the first primary held. But this year, at the direction of President Biden, the Democratic National Committee has announced that they will move the Democratic Party's primary order to have South Carolina go ahead of Iowa and New Hampshire. This change, in all likelihood, is because President Biden performed particularly well in the South Carolina primary in the 2020 election and less well in New Hampshire and Iowa. One issue, however, is that New Hampshire has a law that it has to hold the first primary in the country. So what is going to happen? Today, I am pleased to welcome New Hampshire Secretary of State David Scanlan, who, like other secretaries of state, oversees election procedures to discuss these developments. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Timeless. I hope that you're having a great week. Just a reminder to hit the subscribe button down below so that you can stay notified of all the content that we post on this show. Mondays is my show with Dennis Prager called Dennis and Julie. That premieres at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are Timeless, also premiering at that time. And then throughout the week, I post these Julie noted news videos to keep you updated on certain important, timely developments. I'm so pleased to welcome David Scanlan to the show. He serves as the 54th Secretary of State of New Hampshire, a position that he has held since the end of last year. He previously served as the Deputy Secretary of State and also as the Majority Leader for the New Hampshire House of Representatives. Hi, Secretary Scanlan. Welcome.
Hi, Julie. It's great to be with you.
And thank you so much for your time. I know what a busy schedule you have, especially in anticipation of the 2024 election. So I very much appreciate the time that you've taken to speak with me. My first question for you is, are you in any ongoing discussions with the Democratic National Committee with regard to this primary order?
Julia, I have not had any discussions with the Democratic National Committee. I know that the members of the Democratic State Committee from New Hampshire have been, but in terms of working with them on the schedule for the New Hampshire presidential primary, there's been no contact from me.
If the Democratic National Committee does not back down and they insist that South Carolina goes first, will New Hampshire follow that, or will New Hampshire hold its own primary a week or so before South Carolina's?
Well, New Hampshire has held the first of the nation primary now for over 100 years. There was a law that was passed in the mid-1970s, almost 50 years ago, that said that our primary will go first and at least 7 days before any similar event. And we have stayed true to the state law and the tradition in the state of New Hampshire. So regardless of what the Democratic National Committee would like to do in terms of scheduling, New Hampshire will go at least 7 days before any similar event.
Have you been in touch with your counterpart, Mark Hammond, the Secretary of State of South Carolina, about this?
I have not. I know Mark, but I have not spoken with him about the primary. I don't believe in South Carolina the Secretary of State is the chief election official. They have another board or commission, I believe, that deals with that. But in terms of the Democratic presidential primary in South Carolina, New Hampshire will go at least 7 days before that.
Will President Biden's name even be printed on the ballot?
That's up to President Biden. He has said that he's going to honor the primary as set by the DNC. That certainly had his input. And if he chooses not to run in New Hampshire, we will print the ballots without his name on it and include the names of any other Democratic candidate that has filed to run in the Democratic primary in New Hampshire.
It's really amazing. Needless to say, nothing like this has happened before, certainly in recent American history. Do you think that the Democratic National Committee will recognize the results of the New Hampshire primary that you say, Secretary Scanlan, that your state is going to hold a week before South Carolina's?
I am not sure. First of all, they have not said what the penalties are going to be if New Hampshire jumps ahead of its proposed schedule. Regardless, we will hold that first in the nation primary. And if the penalty is something like withholding delegates to the national convention, so be it. My sense is that, well, we know the delegates will be awarded by New Hampshire after the primary. Many of those may actually go to the president if he does well with write-in votes. And it would be an interesting scene at the Democratic National Convention if those delegates show up at the front door committed to President Biden and they don't let them in. We'll see what happens.
If the Democratic National Committee says, okay, we understand that you held this primary before South Carolina, but we would like you to hold a second primary a week or two after South Carolina and Iowa, will you comply with that demand?
No. The state runs the presidential primary and the state elections in New Hampshire. That process is well documented in our state statutes. And even if there was an effort to have a second nominating event, the logistics of doing that in New Hampshire, trying to acquire polling places, trying to get the additional help to run those polling places a second time, without the support of the state, with the appropriate voter checklists and things like that, would be very difficult to pull off.
We know that in 2020, President Biden in the Iowa caucus came in fourth with 15.8% of the vote. In 2020, in New Hampshire, President Biden came in fifth with 8.4% of the vote. So, as mentioned in the introduction, part of the reason why the Biden administration wants to move South Carolina to be first is that he did very well in South Carolina in 2020, certainly as compared to those numbers in Iowa and New Hampshire. I wonder, Secretary Scanlan, what this change in the order means for Iowa and New Hampshire voters. Do you think that, among Democratic voters, do you think that this change will have any negative blowback for President Biden among his constituents in New Hampshire when they're voting in the 2024 general election?
The problem with the calendar as scheduled by the DNC right now is that it certainly appears to be an effort by the sitting president to have a primary lineup schedule that will benefit him over other candidates. And the Democratic National Committee seems to be going along with that. That is in contrast to why the New Hampshire primary and the Iowa caucuses are incredibly important, because both of those events are designed for the voters in those states to participate and express their desire and their will on who they believe would make the best candidate for president of the United States. It should be an open race, and that benefits the country. So where the process is being controlled by scheduling a series of primaries and caucuses that benefit the incumbent, does not help the American people.
Has the DNC suggested or threatened that it may try to sanction Democratic presidential candidates such as Robert Kennedy Jr., Marianne Williamson, who participate in a New Hampshire Democratic primary that comes ahead of South Carolina's?
Well, I think that would be unfortunate if they penalize candidates that are putting themselves out there as a choice for the voters. I appreciate both candidates, Robert Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson, because they have been running serious campaigns in the state of New Hampshire, regardless of potential penalties that might be imposed upon them.
What is the general feeling among people in New Hampshire on both sides of the aisle about this first in 50-year shakeup of the primary order?
Well, elections of this nature are just part of the culture here in New Hampshire. Our voters are incredibly engaged. The candidates in both parties, except for the president, have been working hard in their campaigns throughout the state. They're well received by the voters. And the voters actually reach out and attend the events of these candidates. It's almost like a sporting event in another state that has a really good professional baseball team or football team. In New Hampshire, the voters here attend political events. It is really a great thing to see.
Roughly, what is the party registration breakdown in the state of New Hampshire?
The Republicans and the Democrats in New Hampshire are almost evenly split. I think the last count that I saw was that the Democrats had a slight lead of just over 800 votes, and that's out of almost 1 million voters in the state of New Hampshire. Mm. The undeclared voters are the largest bloc, probably represent 40% of the voting population.
I see. Interesting. Before we continue with Secretary Scanlan, I'd like to quickly tell you about MyPillow. I use many MyPillow products, including the MyPillows, the Giza Dream bed sheets, the My Towels, and the My Slippers. And you can use them all too and get them at a discount if you use the promo code Hartman, which is my last name, spelled Hartman. For a limited time, you'll get 60% off of the Giza Dream bed sheets. That comes with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. You'll get a set for as low as $39.99 with the promo code Hartman. And also for a limited time, with any purchase, you will get Mike Lindell's soft cover book free. Just go to mypillow.com and click on the radio listener square and use the promo code Hartman, or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman to get deep discounts on all MyPillow products, again, including the MyPillow mattress topper, MyPillow towel sets, and more. Thank you, Secretary Scanlan, for all of the information that you provided to us about the primary order. It will certainly be interesting, to say the least, to observe what happens and how the DNC and the Biden administration would react to it. Shifting to another potential issue with regard to the 2024 presidential election, there has been some discussion in states like Colorado and even in your own state of New Hampshire about trying to disqualify President Trump from the ballot under the 14th Amendment. If New Hampshire officials do try to do this, to keep Trump off of the ballot, as Secretary of State, would your office challenge that in court?
I held a press conference last week on this very topic, and after conferring with the Attorney General of New Hampshire and other lawyers that I respect in this area, a determination was made that as long as a candidate meets the criteria in the United States Constitution under Article 2, which means they're 35 years old, they're a natural-born United States citizen, and they've lived in the country for at least 14 years, and they pay their $1,000 filing fee to get on the ballot, I have little discretion in denying a candidate the space on the ballot. Now, they swear on their declaration of candidacy under the penalties of perjury that what they have conveyed is true. And if it turns out that the information is not correct, then they can be disqualified because of that wrong information. We did have a situation some years ago where a candidate showed up, filled out the paperwork, and then left some campaign literature. And after reading it, it became clear that that individual was not a natural-born United States citizen, and we ended up having to take their name off the ballot. Those provisions under Article 2 are factual. They are easy to prove or disprove. But now the question has come about disqualifying a candidate because of a provision in the 14th Amendment related to insurrection and basically revolution against the country. And that is something that I don't feel qualified to make an individual ruling on. I believe that an issue like that needs to be resolved by a court with due process, and in this case, probably the United States Supreme Court. Because if somebody is guilty of a 14th Amendment violation, it has to be true across the country, not just in one state and not another state. It needs to be uniformly applied. And so I argued in my press conference that the nominating events, the primaries and the caucuses that are run by either the state or the parties using different formats, awarding delegates using different formulas, is not the place for that argument to play out. It will just cause confusion and chaos. Voters will get angry, and if it is a real issue, there really needs to be another way to get the Supreme Court to rule on it.
Mm-hmm. As you very well know, one of the issues that Republicans after the 2020 election focused on were certain rules that were changed in some states that upended decades of precedent of how elections were run. For instance, in some states in the 2020 presidential election, they were a bit more lackadaisical about requiring an ID to vote. Also, in several states, in large part because of the pandemic, there was massive mail-in balloting. What does New Hampshire law, what do New Hampshire statutes say about those two issues specifically, ID or identification to vote and mail-in balloting?
Well, in New Hampshire, a voter is required to present an ID to obtain a ballot. And they are also required to prove their age, identity, citizenship, and domicile with documents. But there is an opportunity in New Hampshire to fulfill that obligation by filling out an affidavit under the penalties of voter fraud. So we do have a photo ID requirement. In terms of absentee balloting, you need an excuse in New Hampshire to obtain an absentee ballot. You either have to be absent from the community that you live in and where you vote, or you have to have an illness or disability that would prevent you from getting to the polling place. Those reasons have been expanded slightly to include things like religious observance. If a person is working at their job, this is meant for people in the medical profession mostly, during the entire time that the polls are open, or if somebody is caring for infirm adults or children, that those would be reasons to obtain an absentee ballot.
We also saw in the 2020 presidential election that Mark Zuckerberg, among others, gave $450 million to privatize election procedures. One example of where that money went was the Center for Tech and Civic Life, which was this organization which essentially came into states and helped run, if you will, election procedures. Now, Democrats and Mark Zuckerberg say that that was needed because of the extenuating circumstances of the pandemic and the lockdowns. If something similar happens in this election, where, for instance, Zuckerberg perhaps will give another large grant to send in supposedly nonpartisan members of an organization to come help run election procedures, how will New Hampshire react?
Well, first of all, private money should not be into the election process under the guise of anything. In New Hampshire, we have a great system where we rely on local election officials who live in the community. They are elected by the voters in those communities, and they are the ones that run the polling place. So hopefully there's a lot of trust that is built there because of the relationships that are local. In New Hampshire, we don't have county-based election organizations. Each town in New Hampshire and each city ward is a polling place. And because of that, we have some of the smallest polling places in the country, like Dixville Notch. And we have some of the largest in the country, like Derry and Bedford, Hollis, a number of towns that have as many as 18,000 voters at a single polling place. Those places run incredibly well because we have a moderator, a clerk, supervisors of the checklist, selectmen, all local election officials that are all elected locally. They can bring in extra help to get through a busy election, but it is the voters' peers that are actually running an election in New Hampshire. It's a great process.
Secretary Scanlan, thank you so much for your time today, and I wish you all of the best.
Thank you. It was great to be with you.
And thanks to all of you for joining me. All of us will be staying tuned to see how this shakes out. Take care. See you soon.